Welcome, Pathfinders, to the Find the Path Ventures. Don't think we gave this a name. Interview with Ron Lundeen. That will be the official name for this.
Yeah, there you go. I literally titled this live stream Paizo Interview. So
Paizo Interviews. All right. A look behind the scenes here. I am, of course, your host, Rick Sandage. I am joined by my co-horse, Sorry,
I'm not
I
a
apologize for
horse.
that.
You're a horse.
Jordan Jenkins. He is not a horse, of course. And we are joined by Ron Lundeen, developer for Paizo and the author of a certain wonderful book here. I think I've got it here, but I think it's also over. Is it on that side, Jordan?
Yeah, it's on that side.
I can't remember which way I'm pointing. The Dead Roads, book 1 of Tyrant's Grasp. So welcome to the show, Ron.
Oh, very glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for coming on. And so we're going to be asking a couple questions of Ron, talking a little bit about the Dead Roads, as we did just finish this book in the last episode. I believe is episode or chapter 31, because we call those chapters. The End of the Road.
Oh.
So, yeah, rightly so. So, and we'll be asking a couple questions of Ron here. We'll also be taking some questions from the audience. So if you have anything that you're wanting to talk to Ron, either about the Dead Roads itself, or as we're just discussing in the pre-show banter, which is exclusive to just us here. Ron was also responsible for the development of this, pretty much most of this adventure path, with help from Crystal Fraser. And so if you have any questions pertaining towards that, and preferably a way that doesn't spoil the adventure path, but
yeah, we're going to try to very harshly avoid spoilers so that everybody can enjoy this interview.
Everyone enjoys it. So yeah, before I guess we get started talking about the Dead Roads, Ron, do you mind if we ask you a couple of questions, delve into, get people a chance to learn about the mystery man behind this book?
Who I am. All righty, question away.
So you are a developer at Paizo. For those who don't know, what exactly does a developer do?
I'm sort of a showrunner, I guess maybe is a way to put it. When we have when we want to concept a project, the developer gets involved with, all right, what's the high level outline of this project going to be? What's maybe a more specific outline of the project going to be? Then the developer will find freelance authors in order to do the writing based on the outline. And then when the text comes back in, the developer goes through and makes sure that the project kind of really shines. It's not so much an editorial pass. I'm not so much fixing commas and semicolons and the like, but I'm making sure that the product that comes in, it aligns with it's correct as far as things that go on in our world, that it's right when it comes to the rules, that it uses sort of Paizo's voice to speak in. The way I describe it is the developer will assign something out and then take the product and make it one step better, right? If we get something that's okay, we can make it good. If we get something that's good, we can make it great, right? And I mean, if it's great, we can put, just a little polish on it in order to make it really shine. It'd be one of the really famous favorite things we do. But after finishing with that, we pass it off to our edit team, who is great, and art, which does the layout. They put the art in. The last thing that a developer does with a product is the copy, fit, and approvals, where this is where I finally get to see what the product is going to look like on the page that's going to be sent to the pages are going to be sent to the printer. With the art there, what are the words going to look like? We're looking for minor things like, does the paragraph break appropriately across the page? And things like that. But it's also where it's kind of real to me, right? Because this is what it's going to look like. This is what people are going to see when they hold this in their hands or open it up in their PDF reader or whatever. Yeah. And that's for that reason, that's like the most fun part of it for me.
That's awesome. So you're kind of like a head chef with all the sous chefs just going around and seeing what needs a little extra pepper or something.
That is a great way to put it. I may steal that analogy and use that in the future. When in some
You're
other
welcome
interview,
to.
What does a developer do? Well, I'm like a head chef.
Yep, I've got the big hat.
So Luis Loza actually told us that you are a lawyer, or were a lawyer previously. Is that correct?
It is. I am still a lawyer, technically, member of the Washington State Bar.
Wow.
Yeah, I was a corporate attorney for many years, and I would do freelance writing on the side. And when Paizo had an opening for a developer, I'd worked with a lot of different developers, and I even did some freelance development for Paizo when they got behind on a couple of products and needed somebody outside the company to do some development. I worked on some of the player companion products. And when they had a full-time opening for a developer, I got a hold of Adam Daigle, who is the one who would be my boss, right? And I said, hey, I want to let you know, I'm really interested in applying for the developer job and coming to Paizo. And he was initially quite surprised. He's like, you know, we don't pay what lawyers pay, right? Like, oh, I absolutely know, but this is my opportunity to do something that I really love and really want to be doing with my life. And it's, you know, so creative and get to work with so many awesome creative people. And this would be a lot of fun. It's a life change that I'd want to make and do. And my wife, to her credit, was the one that actually kind of got me through several times of, well, maybe it's not, it would be kind of a risk. I don't know if I want to do that. Is it the smart move? What's the safe move? She's like, go do it. Follow your dreams. You're getting the opportunity. Follow your dreams. So we did. And it's about coming up on 3 years ago now. Left Chicago and moved out here to the Seattle area.
Wow. So this is getting a little off topic here, but is that what draws you so much to Starfinder? Is the idea of like Abadar Corp and all these corporations? You're like, I really know how to make these people make this work.
Absolutely, yes. If I could plug one thing that I wrote freelance recently, it's perhaps one of my most favorite things that I've written freelance. The Lost Omen Legends book that talks about awesome characters in the Pathfinder setting.
Mm-hmm.
The entry for Abigail Thrune of Cheliax comes with a full page infernal contract.
Funny enough, when we were doing the review of that book, that is when Luis brought up that you're a lawyer, because we're like, it seems actual, like a legally binding contract.
Well, yeah, because I read it, and I work in an enterprise, and so I look at contracts and stuff, and I was like, this is like legit, like there's like legal terminology in here and everything. So that's when Luis told us.
Except it's awful, right? All of the things that would be so one-sided and terrible to get in a template contract, I put into this template contract in order to make it just the worst thing that anybody could ever possibly sign, because it's so stacked against you. And I loved every minute of it. I was able to draw deep on my contract. Like, I remember when this company was trying to pull this over on my client. It didn't work then, but I'm going to put it in now. And I remember when this company was trying to pull this thing. Anyway, it was great.
Yep, I look forward to the future Starfinder Abadar Core adventure path. But you'll all show up in your suits. So, yeah, so out of curiosity, like, what got you into tabletop gaming to begin with? Just, I guess, going a little bit further back, like what?
Oh, this goes way back, like 1983 back or 1985 back or whatever. Whenever the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons adventure Journey to the Rock came out, and my neighbor next door, the kid next door, is like, oh, I got this Dungeons and Dragons game, let's play it. I've got this story about, where you make up these characters, fight these monsters, and try to get to this rock, and then there's a dungeon underneath and a bunch of monsters to fight. And we ended up, I don't know that we ever actually got all the way to the rock, because we just kept getting killed over and over by all the monsters. But I loved it even then, right? And then I don't know whether at the time I thought, maybe I can do a little bit better, but I took over DMing at that point, and then I was DMing when I was a kid all the way through my teens, through undergrad, grad school, law school, all of that. I talked to a lot of people, talk about, you play Dungeons and Dragons. They're like, yeah, I used to play that. I kind of quit when I got 13 or 14. I'm like, not me, never quit.
Never stopped. There you go. Well, yeah, and and look at where you are now. It's exactly. successful lawyer, and then you're like, you know what? I played all through college. I might as well just keep going.
Yep.
So, and I think we're talking a little bit about this in the pre-banter too, but you have written an impressive number of adventures, including an Iron Gods, Hell's Vengeance, Strange Aeons, great adventure, by the way.
Thank you.
The Iron Fang Invasion, Ruins of Aslant, War for the Crown, Tyrant's Grasp, obviously, Age of Ashes, and that's just they just released the Slithering, which I believe was your work. And I think you have a new book coming out next month for Agents of Edgewatch.
I do. And the same month, the Agents of Edgewatch adventure comes out. My adventure for Starfinder comes out. You haven't gone through the Starfinder ones. You've got
that's just touching.
It's not Thrones, and you've got fourth one of Dawn of Flame. But I was really excited. The one that I really liked the story that I got to tell in the fourth Agents of Edgewatch adventure. But the thing I'm looking forward to maybe a little bit more is that Starfinder adventure, because it's for 18th through 20th level characters, and there's just never been a product that high level before. And so being able to write that and then the play test of it that I did, and it was just eye-opening what characters could do at those levels.
Yeah. It's like, what can a 20th level envoy do? Let's check this page out. It's probably the least used section of most of my books is those capstone 20th level things where you're just like, that's really cool conceptually.
Yeah.
Right.
We have never played up to 20th level yet.
No.
Not yet.
Yeah. Like
Hopefully
there's hope.
Someday.
There's hope.
We'll keep trying.
Yeah, you'll get there. I mean, the way you guys are going, it's a matter of time because you guys are just telling so many different stories.
Yeah, we can hope so. We'll see. I'll just keep adding things to Mummy's Mask until something happens.
We'll do that. We'll do the continuing the adventure at the very end of it. We'll just ride.
You really don't want to know what you have to face continuing that adventure.
Oh no! Now I really want to know.
So I guess we can jump into our questions about the Dead Roads.
Sure.
About the book in question. So I was the game master for this. Jordan was a player in this, so I think my questions will probably be a little bit more focused on the story and the writing side of it, where I'm sure Jordan can get a little bit more into the trenches itself. But so Dead Roads is the first book of the Tyrant's Grasp Adventure Path, which is, of course, the last adventure path for first edition. What were your thoughts, kind of feelings going into writing the first book for the last first edition adventure path? Kind of the kicking off point for this pivot in the story.
Well, the thing that I was really excited about it. As far as being a writer goes, I was very excited to be able to be kicking off a story that tells sort of this grand arc. We won't get into spoilers, but you start out dead, right? That's how. Yeah. That's how the whole adventure path starts out. I get to be the one where you start out dead. And that was really thrilling to me to be able to write. What does that mean? How does that frame within the story, et cetera, et cetera? So that was actually a lot of fun. It wasn't until I took over the development of Tyrant's Grasp. So I wrote the first one. Crystal Frazier, who had done great work that I was able to build on. She's the one that sort of, worked to concept the whole thing, outline the adventure path from beginning to end, find all of the authors for it, and get us going. She was the one that I was writing for when I did the Dead Roads, but then she left the company and I took over her role. So I developed everything after the Dead Roads. And I feel like coming in at number two through 6, because I'd written number 1, I felt like I had a good solid grounding to be able to carry Crystal's work on, if that makes sense. And that was really good. The thing that I remember thinking at the time, though, is I want to tell a really good story here, but from the company perspective, putting the new guy on the flagship subscription product line is as low a possible risk when it is going to be the least best selling or the worst selling adventure path of all time, because everybody's off to Age of Ashes and second edition, right?
They missed out.
It was a pretty safe move for them, but it doesn't mean I tried any the less hard for it, right? Because I knew there was kind of a really neat story to be able to tell through there, and I wanted to make sure I was doing it really well.
So you chose to write book 1, like you really wanted to be.
No, I got pulled into it. As it turns out, there are a number of the things I've written for adventure paths. If it's a chapter 1 of something, then almost certainly I didn't pick that I wanted to do chapter 1. The developer came to me and said, "Hey, we're behind schedule. You know how to do these backward and forward. You can do them fast and clean. Could you please write number 1 to get me back on schedule for the rest of the adventure path?" And that was the case with Tyrant's Grasp as well. We're kind of looking around and going, "Who's going to be able to do this fast?" And in one of our meetings where we were talking about it. I think it might have even been Crystal that said, probably ought to be somebody in this room that writes it. Like, oh, God, okay.
If you're twisting my arm.
Yeah, I thought
Awesome.
the from a player perspective, kind of the most interesting part of that book is not even necessarily the survival horror, but it's starting extraplanar. So, like from a conceptual standpoint, that always sounded cool. But now that I've played through it, I kind of regretted my enthusiasm for wanting an extra planar adventure. But
depends a lot on the plane, right?
Yeah, did that make it easier or harder to write? Because like you have nowhere to buy gear, kind of don't really have super friendly NPCs. Like, was that harder or easier?
It's harder, and it's certainly tough for me to try to remember, all right, what are the aspects of this particular plane that I have to keep in mind. Is something as interesting as, or something as like even the day-night cycle and how people move around is different in a extraplanar adventure. So you got to keep that in mind. Not being able to buy stuff was actually, it's a feature, not a bug. That was intentional, that the players have this adventure path where you just have to rely on your own wits and whatever you can scavenge to try to be able to get by. We put in the player's guide, maybe a gunslinger is a terrible choice here because you're not going to be able to just go walk down to the ammo store.
Yeah.
Having to get along on your own was actually something really appealing about starting in the planes. And it wasn't a lofty, all right, of all the different planes that are out there, let's start with this big extraplanar adventure. It's very focused on what is this plane like, and within this plane, who are specifically these players that are the power players that are involved, and within that, how are they going to react to this one thing that's happening? So I managed to focus in pretty closely. That type of focus is really best served on a first level adventure, because that's when the players themselves are trying to get a sense of the world and the story. So if it's got a very tight focus on them in a small environs, then they feel like they kind of grow and explore as they get first, second, third, fourth level, and so on.
Oh yeah. Well, and the advantage of it being a much lower level is you don't have to worry about accounting for someone being capable of plane shifting or anything like that. You're like, nope, you're stuck.
Yeah.
Here's the road out. Follow the adventure.
Right. You can mix it up a little bit. The road isn't linear, so you can kind of pick and choose some things. But yeah, you've got to get on the path. As James Jacobs has said several times, it's an adventure path, not adventure lots of little paths. So there's a way to go.
Yep. So you got to find it, and then you find the path to where you're going.
That's right. Exactly.
Wink. So the interesting thing is the other adventure path that we started with was Mummy's Mask, and Mummy's Mask, for those of you who have listened to our other podcast or read the first book of Mummy's Mask, is a lottery where you go to 3 different sites. And I remember thinking when I ran it, it's like, man, this is kind of challenging, like going through 3 different locations and doing like these 3 mini dungeons. So was it challenging to make an adventure that really centers around kind of 5 good-sized dungeon adventure locations? Because it's there's the tomb and then 3 way stations and then Death Bower.
Right. Which really is, you don't have the full freedom of the 5. You got to start with the number 1. You got to start with the tomb. You've got to end with Death Bower, and the 3 in the middle you can do sort of wherever you'd like. Although some of them would be really, so the Nine Eves would be a little harder if you did it first. The one of the toothfairies is a little bit easier if you do it first. And then one of the things that I remember Crystal told me she was adding, because remember when she was developing this, she could literally just turn around and be like, oh, hey, Ron, so she mentioned, hey, I kind of want to have your awesome NPCs, Umble and Thoot, suggest an order, just so players who feel like so they don't run headfirst into the very hardest thing right away. They got a little bit of guidance. Like, all right, well, that makes a lot of sense. So she added that. So to the extent there is not several people running right into the scriptorium and dying, that is Crystal's able development there.
Yeah. And of course, my players immediately attach themselves to Umble and Thoot because there's a Nisoi psychopomp that helps them in Mummy's Mask also, that shows up in Crystal Fraser's book of Mummy's Mask, the second book.
Oh, wow. Wow.
It's a weird coincidence.
And so they're just like, oh, it's a Nisoi. Well, we love them. They're very helpful.
But, I like them. They're one of my favorite little creatures. Whenever I can throw them in, I don't think that I'm ever going to be able to do as well as Umbel and Foot as a pairing for maybe my favorite Nisoi and Vanth ever. But we'll see.
And again, I think I mentioned this in a recent episode that we were doing, but I always enjoy when a writer includes mannerisms to a character beyond just like the way they look or the way that they move, and the Nisoi using like random words like amortal and misappropriating words to use them for the wrong thing. It's a very interesting character quirk to it, and I always love when characters have those. Especially for something like a podcast, have a very audible, interesting quirk to them.
Yeah. Where they can do, it's not necessarily just a look, but kind of a sound, the way they sound when you read their words out. There is that is fun to do. It's a little bit hard to do because you don't want to be putting in an accent that might be stereotypical, right? You don't want to do like a Southern accent to make somebody sound uneducated. I mean, that's just that's not cool to a number of readers and players. So you want to be able to come up with something kind of new with the way you present the way that people talk. And so the way that the Psychopomp talks is not, I mean, it's not entirely new. My mother-in-law sounds actually like that. She's smart, but she'll put different pieces of words together and then expect everybody to know what it means.
This will make sense.
It's delightful, actually, but it made for a good resource for me to make up this character.
It made for good radio for us. So, so the way stations themselves were actually very unique. I was kind of curious, as especially with the toothfairies, it's kind of out there. I was wondering if there were any crazy ideas for the way stations that didn't make the cut for you. Like you had an idea and you're like, that's too far out there.
No, there was actually no, because the way I built the way stations, I knew there would be 3. I wanted them to be 3, and I wanted them to be different takes on horror. So one of the toothfairies is very much kind of a body horror, and the one with the 9 Eves is very much gothic horror, and then there's a little bit of cosmic horror in the scriptorium. Yeah. And so my plan for that was to be able to hit on all 3 of those kind of right away. And then I built those up to the extent I had a little more or less space when I was writing, and there's always less. There's always less than you think there is.
Always less.
It's to pivot around those 3 things and try to make each of those 3 things sort of really exciting, really pop.
Yeah. Well, awesome.
Yeah. One of the interesting things for us was we went in knowing this is Tyrant's Grasp. We knew that this was probably going to be fairly undead heavy. Boy, were we surprised when we went into the first book and there are no undead. Was that purposeful?
Not one.
Not a single one.
Not a single one in the entire story, because they wouldn't be permitted in the Boneyard.
Yeah.
They would be entirely out of place in the Boneyard. And and I thought for a little while about having some kind of undead that's maybe hiding out and trying to avoid the attention of the Psychopomps. But Sawkills fit that role a whole lot better because they are the type of fear predators who are direct enemies of the Psychopomps. And so having sort of a beachhead of Sawkills made a lot more sense for the story than undead. And it did let me go all the way through the thing and have a skeletal woman in flowers on the cover, even in a place called the Boneyard, and not have, and then fight things that look like skeletal horses and skeletons. And there is not a single undead in the entire adventure.
Trust me, our player Heather was very much disappointed by that, playing a Ghost Rider Cavalier with the fighting undead order or whatever it was.
I know we said no spoilers, but she'll be fine.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
That's what I kept stressing to her. It's like, because they would bring up, there's no undead. This is the undead adventure path. And it's like, well, obviously the Psychopomps are doing their job. So
you're doing them a little too good for our taste.
Can't you just let a skeleton pass, guys? Come on. So speaking of the skeleton, speaking of the cover of this, and therefore speaking of Bactina, I found it very interesting that in essence, McTina is the main villain of this book, of the Dead Roads. But she's not really villainous so much as she's just doing her job.
Right. She's an antagonist.
She's an antagonist.
A villain, right? And that was part of the fun too. I wanted to make sure, and I this might have been in the outline, right? To actually try to tell a story where the enemy isn't somebody who's evil and needs to get bashed because they're doing something bad. Frankly, to the extent there's a villain in this piece, it's not McTina, it's bureaucracy. Yeah. She is just an agent of the bureaucracy trying to get her job done. She's a corporate functionary, right? And she's just so wrapped up in what she's doing that she is unwilling to listen to the characters telling their story. Oh, look, we're different. We've got this exception. We need to know. She's like, no, I'm not going to stand for any sort of exception. She's narrow-minded, and that's what makes her an antagonist. Yeah. But being narrow-minded doesn't make you a villain necessarily. Yeah. So,
and I think it made her a very interesting presence in the story, because the party knew they were just like, we know that this is on the horizon. We know it's like we're trying to follow all of the rules and get our stamps at the way station and get to where we're going. Right. And even when she steps in, it's just like, well, we're going to talk to these lieutenants and maybe try to convince everyone to get on our side. And for those who haven't listened to the last episode, you can find out whether or not that works. Yeah. But I found it very interesting because, especially with her backstory, you can really sympathize with her and just go, we understand, but also we really need to get home.
That's right. We're not going to stay. We understand wholly why you want us to stay, but we're not going to stay. So there's the tension, right? That has to be resolved some way.
Yeah. I think I jokingly referred to it at some point as she's kind of like the lady behind the counter at an airport that you're trying to explain why you need to get on a flight. And she's like, yeah, but I can't do anything about it. You don't have the right pass.
Right. That's right.
So,
and even when you're trying to get them together, she cheats, right? She just moves Deathbower into the way, so you can't have to deal with her. Sort of.
There's no walking around me.
Exactly.
Oh man. So to close out our questions, I'd say this adventure path book was insane in all the best connotations of that. I mean, we had tears, we had elation, we had one of our characters actually blowing the party up with the little grasshopper little notes that were being brought to us that eventually was ruined.
Origami. Yep.
Did you ever think somebody was going to use that as a weapon against the big grasshopper guy?
So to give you an idea, in the story, the party didn't open up because they detected magic and went, oh, that's an evocation aura on that. That seems like a bad idea. So the party bard kept it, and then when they got into the fight against the Suckhill a little bit later in the ballroom, just like opened it up and like shoved it in their face. And did not realize that a rune of blasting is a radius effect. So blew up a vast majority of the party and nearly killed herself in the process. But it was an interesting addition.
Yeah. On a more serious note, though, like things end up on the cutting room floor. What are some of the things that you didn't get in, due to word count or other reasons that you wish you'd been able to get in to this book?
One of the things that, and actually this was left on the cutting room floor kind of early in the writing process when I realized how tight the words were going to be, I wanted Deathbower to include some other NPCs that were sort of in the PC's position, right? People were like, look, she's doing her job and I hate it, but I'm stuck here and I can't do anything about it, right? Reed Reaper doesn't quite fill that role. Reed Reaper has a different relationship with her, but having some other, maybe even a group, right? Somebody that the PCs can directly commiserate with and say, yeah, she's not letting us out either. Can you believe that?
Just complaining in the lobby.
Exactly. But I think what I realized is the message about her feeling like she's just got to do her job, and that was she's going to do it mercilessly because she thought that's the right way to do her job, had otherwise been communicated pretty effectively through, even from the talking to the ghostly kids in town all the way to the other psychopomp that you meet, 80, I think her name is, and Reed Reaper. I mean, I think that message got through pretty clear, so I didn't need to be devoting the words to that kind of thing. It's hard put things on it's hard to have to cut, because the things you want to cut are kind of throwaway encounters that are just sort of, it's a fight and then we move on.
Yeah.
But those aren't very long, and they're not very, and you kind of need the math to make the math of leveling up work. So those are the things that it doesn't do you very much good to cut them. It ends up being sort of longer interactions that you end up having to cut. And that was the kind of thing that I felt like I couldn't fit into Death Bower, even though I wanted to.
Yeah. Well, that's unfortunate, because that would have been really interesting.
Yeah.
And there's an interesting tease that the party gets, and I won't go into detail, but there's an interesting tease that the party gets at the end of this book that, they may not be the only people experiencing this.
Right.
So.
And part of that, I will say, is designed to ensure that the plot continues even with different PCs.
Yeah.
So that's because the adventure path is hard, right? And if somebody gets killed, they don't want to be, all right, well, I'm not part of this club anymore. No. There are other people who could be part of this club, and you're assumed to be playing one if you come in.
Yeah. So and I think that sums up the questions that we had for Ron, but I believe we have a couple from our chat.
Oh, do we ever? Lots of questions in the chat here. All right, so the first couple here are from Graf and the boys.
Hey, Graf.
Here with us live. Question: You've been developing Paizo adventure paths for a long time, including the upcoming Magambia Pathfinder 2nd Edition AP. How has the development process changed at Paizo?
Ooh, that's a good question. A lot of the initial concepting, that it's done sort of collectively. It's done with a discussion about what other products are coming out about the same time, and how can we tie into those, or what do we need to do to advance the story. A lot of that is the same. We have a lot of people that have joined Paizo that are paying particularly close attention to diversity issues, situations like that. It's a little ironic for me to say that here as a white guy, but it was very important for me to have non-white voices with the Strength of Thousands adventure path.
Yes.
And I think that in an earlier day, the general consensus was, well, we can't really do a Mwangi adventure path because we don't have those voices in our company. And so I'm like, all right, well now I want to go get them. I want to, talk to the experienced freelancers that are going to be able to do that. We've got a much more diverse group of developers, a much more diverse sort of pool of freelancers. And that's allowed me to be able to do that where I might not have been able to do so before. We rely a lot more than we've done before on sensitivity readers. This is and Dead Roads is a good example. That is almost certainly a product that would have, if we did it today, would get a much deeper and closer sensitivity read, because it does raise issues of body horror, like I said, and it raises issues of disability. And sort of grief counseling. Those are the kind of things we want to make sure we're not doing in a way that makes anybody that touches our game recoil because of the things we've presented. And I think I'd like to feel like I took some very good lessons out of the Dead Roads. I know I can do better. We can always do better, and that's what the whole process is trying to do better and be better. That's, I think, the biggest change in the development.
Yeah. I think the roster on the first subject there, I think the roster that you have for Strength of Thousands looks amazing. And I think it really shows how the audience itself has changed, perhaps, or at the very least the consumer as far as Paizo products have changed somewhat, because it's the adventure path I am the most excited for.
Oh, neat.
Of everything that's come out for second. Like the moment that came out, it's like, that is something that has intrigued me for a long time. And the fan reaction to it, I think, has been very strong. And so I think it's a great direction that the company is taking in letting these voices that don't normally get heard have this time in the spotlight in the foreground and really be able to demonstrate their talents and have an amazing roster of people lined up for that.
Well, yeah, and the thing that's great for us is that we also, these are people we've reached out to for this, but then they join our pool, and sort of I get a sense of what Michelle Jones is good at, what Ali Bustian is good at. These are people that can use them sort of going on and on thereafter. So that's great for me as a developer, because the more talented people I have, and people are talented in different ways, the easier my job is, right?
Yeah. The less you have to jump in at the last second and take a book.
Exactly.
Yeah, I would definitely say that the Strength of Thousands is one of those adventure paths that, like, we heard about the announcement, and both me and my fiance Jess, who's on the pod with me, we gasped, like audibly gasped, like, oh my gosh, this is such a big deal.
It's actually happening.
It was one of those things, like, we'd always talked about, like, we would love to see a Voudrin adventure path. We'd like to see one in like some of these locations where you don't get a lot of representation. And
Arcadia, I know.
And it was just this like it felt like the dawning of a new age, it really like felt like we had finally like kind of we've hit a new era, a new step forward. And it's always interesting to get to see the development of that, as you're, a longtime fan who's been this multiple years, and to see how things have grown and changed, and to see what, could have been a big risk in all honesty, and to see that Paizo's taking a very, I think, like a very risky step, but I think it's something that you see that all the fans are so ready for. And I think that's the best part, is just seeing just how much happiness you bring with something like that.
Yep.
Not to put too much pressure on y'all to deliver on that, but I'm certain that you will.
No pressure. No, and that's and that's part of my job. And one of the things that a developer does is take blame and push credit, right? So anything that I've developed, if people are like, "Oh, I think X is awesome," I'm like, "That author did a great job," right?
Yeah.
No, I think Y is not so good. I'm like, I had to make some decisions in development. Come to me with that, right? So, but it does help to be able to kind of step back a little bit and say, all right, what's the story? How do you want to tell this story? And then run with it. And then how do you want to tell this story and run with it? And that's the case for everything we do. It's for Strength of Thousands, for Abomination Vaults, for Extinction Curse. That's one of the joys of my job.
Awesome.
Another question from Graph, giving you a slightly easier one, hopefully this time around. If you could go back in time, what was one thing you wish young you knew?
Ooh.
I like that you said easier, and then we've got this philosophical question.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
right.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. There are a lot of non-gaming things, right? Like, no, don't waste your time with that Katie girl. It's not going to go anywhere. Get with her anyway. But as far as the actual writing and gaming goes, now that I know that Paizo isn't a monolithic corporation that's got a sort of an outward face, kind of an outward intimidating face, knowing that they're just people behind it, and they're sometimes often very approachable people, busy people, but very approachable people. I think I might have been maybe even a little more aggressive about trying to get my name in there to do work and talk about the things that I can do. This is something, this comes from being, in my late 40s. I had to kind of get pushed into sort of seeing the way the gig economy works. And a lot of people know that that's how it works. And so I'm really pleased that a lot of the freelancers I work with now, they've kind of got that down. They know, it's been a month since I checked with Ron. I'm going to send him another email, let him know I'm interested. And then maybe this time I'll let him know, I can do this and this as well as this other thing that I said, because I've been, working in the meantime. And so on. And they're sort of that kind of hustling for that. I could have been doing more of that. And that's something that younger me maybe I wish younger me might have known.
Yeah, that's a great life lesson, and that's a great thing to share with people. That every time we talked a little bit about PaizoCon before we started this, and every time that we've gone to PaizoCon, everyone in the Paizo staff is so approachable. Yeah, you can just walk up and start talking. And a little behind the scenes here for our podcast is, we went to Heather and I went to PaizoCon year before last, and ended up just talking to James Jacobs, and I kind of gave him the elevator pitch on our podcast. And he was like, "Oh, that's a great thing." Then he wrote down an email address on a card, and it's like, take this and email over to. That's when I can't remember who it was that was in the. I wanted to say it was licensing at the time, but gave us their email address and sent over an email and started the ball rolling on getting us our partnership. So
that's awesome.
Again, it's just kind of jump in with both feet, and the worst thing that can happen is someone says no, and usually I found with Paizo, if you bring up something or address them, then usually the response tends to be, well, that's interesting, I'll keep that in mind, or if you're interested in growing or expanding, look here, or focus on this. So it's great that you guys act as a gateway to so many people, and I'm glad that there was someone there to bring you in so that we have amazing books like this one.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh man, next question still from Graf. I'm just working my way from top to bottom.
Okay.
So he asks, historically adventure paths are always 6 books, and some books in the adventure path have been considered superfluous by the community. Paizo is starting to experiment with 3-book adventure paths recently, most notably in Starfinder. Will we be able to see more flexible formats in the future that are more matched to the story?
Yes. There's short answer. Yes. No,
wow, that was really easy. All right,
moving on.
Yeah,
I think we're done here. Thanks, Ron.
Yes. We've got upcoming the Abomination Vaults is a mega dungeon adventure, and part of the reason we haven't done that is because keeping a mega dungeon interesting from 1st through 20th level isn't impossible, but it's really hard.
Yeah.
And it's much, much, much more viable to have an adventure path that goes from 1st through 10th level that all takes place in the mega dungeon. I think that the sort of deviation from the story that the questioner mentioned. I've always kind of liked those as sort of a palate cleanser type of thing. It's like, well, here you are deep in this noble intrigue, and now you're going to a different plane for this whole adventure, or now we're doing our circus all over the world or all over this island, and now you're going deep underground for an adventure. Those are often the 5th book of of an adventure path. I'm not going to say anything more about Tyrant's Grasp specifically, but it's not immune. And part of the reason that we do that is it's important to put focus on the climax that happens in the 6th book. And rather than keep consistent pressure up to that 6th book, it's sometimes very effective from a narrative point of view to keep the pressure, get everybody going with the story, kind of head somewhere else just for a minute, and then slam back into the climax to make it strong.
Yeah.
So we do it. It's intentional, and I think it's something that a lot of people are like, well, we've gotten away from the story, but we're telling that thread kind of on purpose that way.
Yeah. For anime fans out there, I think that's usually referred to as the beach episode.
Ah, yes.
It's
the
usually when you've got
episode,
you've been building up to this, and then it's like, and then everyone goes to the beach for an episode, just so we could get a change of pace and maybe a little bit, maybe a different vibe for things, and then now we're going to go right into the book 6 Big Bag by Kai now. Right. So I look forward to the inevitable Tyrant's Grasp beach episode.
And it wasn't just this. You would think that the one where you're in the boneyard for the whole that sounds kind of like one of our beach episodes, as you say.
Yeah.
Like you're doing this whole thing, but you're going to spend an adventure in a different plane. But it's not.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I know where it's going, and I'm very excited.
Yep.
And he's not saying. We've asked and bribed.
All right.
A lot.
All right, then I'm not saying either.
Oh man, next question. I swear there are other people in the chat besides just Graf, but he asked all the questions.
Graf has some amazing questions, I've got to say, and maybe the boys are contributing as well. So
yeah, these are actually really good. So his question is, if you could change or add one thing to the Pathfinder 2nd Edition rules, class, rules elements, etc., what would you change or add?
Ooh. I am in the minority, but I think that fighters are kind of dumb. I think the fight.
I'm glad Rachel isn't here.
I think the fighter class is just doesn't spark the same interest in me that other classes do. I would present the fighter in a different way. I would take the opportunity for an edition change to present the fighter in a different way. And because we've already got people who are kind of super good at fighting, we've got a barbarian, we've got a rogue, we've got a monk. I think that having the fighter class be more of a, to use a 4th edition D&D term, more of a leader, kind of a warlord type of class or a war master sort of class, could keep a focus on the fighter in a really, if for somebody that just wants to pick up a weapon and hurt things, but somebody who can pick up a weapon and hurt things, and in so doing be an inspiration to their adventuring group, just seems like a more effective use of that space. So that's the change I would make.
That's a fun idea. And
yeah.
And of course, the brilliant thing with 2nd edition and the feat system and the way the feats work is that something that feasibly could be expanded upon in the future. If it's just, here's Ultimate Combat 2.0 and here's the Ultimate Combat 2.0, general fighter that gets cool feats every, you have feat options for things like, the envoy, like, I can make people do extra things.
Yep.
So no, it's a lot of fun. I like the idea behind that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Next question.
I won't tell Rachel, my wife, who loves fighters. Fighters are her favorite. They're her bread and butter.
Oh yeah, she loves fighters. She loves 2-weapon fighters specifically.
Especially, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Next question comes from Jess from the pod, who writes, "What dentist hurt you to inspire the use of tooth fairies?"
Oh, I think tooth fairies that's actually what sort of solidified me on the body horror aspect of that castle. Is the Palace of Teeth is tooth fairies. It actually, tooth fairies came first. Palace of Teeth came after, right? I'm like, I want these little critters, and they're not going to be at all welcome, right? So they've set up shop, and they think they own the place, and they're really worried that they're going to lose it or the Cyclops is going to take it back, but the Cyclops just don't care. So a little bit on the pathetic side too. And they've got all their infighting, which just means so much to them, but not to anybody else. So I think that they are sort of, creepy but kind of pathetic creatures, and being able to do sort of that as the body horror chapter, I think was very effective. So Tooth Fairy, they kind of got that started. They did get, I think I remember at the time, the editors, anybody that's seeing the product likes to be told kind of what the product's about before they read it. So if they've got any sort of personal issues, right? Somebody is an arachnophobe, then, the spiders of Spider Mountain is not an adventure that they will want to necessarily be editing. But I did get some feedback that somebody on the editing team asked, and the lead editor didn't say who, but somebody asked, hey, if you're going to put tooth fairies and stuff, hey, let us know ahead of time so we can warn people that tooth fairies are coming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, go on.
So yeah, the thing for me is like I used to have really bad stress dreams, and when it was like its worst was I had dreams where my teeth fell out. Like, I don't know what it was, but it was like always my teeth would just start falling out, and then I would wake up, And it's so funny to see, like, you talk about body horror and you usually think like Saw and like those kind of movies, and to go to like, yeah, right. And like you go to like just getting your teeth ripped out, like, and it was just like so interesting because it's also not really all that damaging, like it's just more horrifying than it is like actually debilitating.
Right.
Absolutely. I'm pretty sure. I couldn't pull it up to see, but I'm pretty sure for those episodes, I did include a warning on the episode description, actually.
Oh, that's good. That's wise.
That involved,
Thank you.
I may have gone a little overboard sometimes with the description when I was running the Tooth Fairies. Although fortunately, and if you haven't ever heard this, Ron, you should definitely check this out. The Sirenscape sound set that includes Tooth Fairies has an amazing Tooth Fairy explosion sound. Which
goodness.
Just made everyone's day.
It was, you just hear the glitter. Is that what you?
Yes. Yes.
It literally sounds like someone pops a balloon full of glitter. I think there's a little squeak thrown in there too.
Yeah, so it's that interesting contrast of they're kind of funny, like cute little things that are ripping our teeth out, but it's so satisfying to kill them.
Yeah. I also had to, I think I included a warning in there because I also included the because they do the dexterity damage with their pliers, and so I mentioned a couple of times of them like grabbing onto people's fingers and just twisting with pliers, and it got a little rough there for some people. So, but I personally very much I'm a Cronenberg fan, so I appreciated the addition of that section. So mostly the fly, but we also had a question in here for. I think we already answered that from Buster Knuckle on well, I guess is there something that in retrospect you would what would you change from book one if you could?
From this adventure?
Yes, from the Dead Roads. Is there something that you would change now looking back if you could?
Yeah, I feel like I set up the players to handle the monsters they are going to be facing fairly well. Early on, you get a bludgeoning weapon in case you don't have one because you've got creatures that resist bludgeoning. I wish I had been a little stronger with that and prepared the characters even more. So where I've heard this adventure go off the rails is people like, oh, and we couldn't even hurt this thing. And I need to be, this is a personal writing thing. I need to be better about preparing the characters to take on the challenges that I put in the adventure instead of assuming they're going to handle it. You mentioned I wrote the Slithering, and I've been hearing some feedback from the Slithering about we just can't hurt any of the oozes that are in this monster or in this adventure. And my initial glib response is, so you say you didn't expect oozes in an adventure called The Slithering, but I shouldn't be glib. I should realize that those are legitimate concerns and that I can work harder to mitigate those. And the Dead Roads is one of the places where I think I could have worked a little harder to mitigate that.
Yeah, I think there was a little bit of an upset with the party, and I may have edited it down a little bit in post. But when the party were fighting some witch crows, and there was a distinct lack of ranged weapons provided to the group, and they just went, until someone like improvised a sack to throw over one of the crows and just drag it to the ground. So,
which surprisingly worked. I'm more surprised that worked, not that we didn't get desperate and try something ridiculous, because we'd already done that a couple of times.
But no, well, again, it's something that I as a game master usually tell my players what they should be expecting going into an adventure. And so I think some people may just sit down and go, okay, my game master said, we're going to get together and we're going to play this adventure. And they're not going to say that it's the Slithering or let them know anything about it, because it's like, oh, it should be a big surprise.
Right.
And then you kind of go into it and go, well, I'm a character that focuses entirely on critical hits and I'm fighting oozes, or I'm a character that focuses entirely on enchantment magic.
Right.
And, run into those problems. So I think it can be communication on both sides.
Yeah, I think so. I think I liken it to movie trailers, right? You can't just walk into a theater. I mean, you could, I guess. So I don't even know what they're showing, but whatever they're showing next in this theater, that's what I'm going to go see. I mean, no, you want to know whether it's going to be an action, it's going to be superhero, whether it's got actors you like, whether it's got, whether or not, it's rating to let you know whether or not you can expect a lot of gore or not, or heartwarming puppies or not. I mean, that's the trailers give you that. And I assume anybody going into any one of the adventures has a very high level trailer overview. And I know there are some GMs who just prefer not to give even that. Yeah.
So again, and Paizo does a great job with having the player's guides, where those give you a very good idea of usually what you're going to face, or at the very least, a very good idea of what you should expect, the directions you expect the story to go.
Right. Right. And things not to do, right? That's one of the important roles of a player's guide. You will have less fun if you are playing X kind of character. I feel like that's the most important communication that player's guides give.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No paladins in Skull and Shackle.
Right.
And with that, the chat has dried up as far as questions.
Well, Graf did ask one more question.
Oh, did he?
Which was, if you could change or add one thing to the Golarion setting, what would you change?
Oh, Man, that's a good question.
That's why I wanted to ask it.
Yeah, it's a good question because there's a lot of, well, and let me back up to say, anytime anybody says that's a good question, it means they need time to think. And that's no exception here. Adding what I might add is hard because Golarion has so much stuff in it already.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that whatever type of story you want to tell, whether it's sort of, the gothic horror of Ustalov or the kind of the sword and, tech of Numeria, I think a lot of stuff is already there for you. I think one of the things that I would like to add, though, that perhaps the setting doesn't include quite so well, is a little more sort of space opera-y. I think you get some science fantasy in Numeria. That's where you can get some laser guns and things like that. But if you want to be the person and then I'm going from here to the moon and then to the Akaton, right, our version of Mars and so on, and that type of sort of fantasy type story, that sort of John Carter type stories.
Yeah,
we have one very specific product that does that, Distant Worlds, but we don't lean into that very heavily. And with the existence of Starfinder, now we won't be leaning into it, I'm pretty sure, for Golarion, because that people who want to scratch that itch have a game they can play to do it.
Yeah.
But I think that's a type of stories I'd be more excited to tell in Golarion to the extent I could. And it is probably entirely disconnected from that Strength of Thousands has an adventure called Doorway to the Red Star, which is a place in our game that is rumored to be a gateway to a different planet. So I'm trying to fix that. Hey, I see a need. I feel the need.
I mean, I would personally be very interested in a space opera story as well. And when you first started talking about that, you're talking about going to place and everything. My first thought was, you would definitely sell me if you wanted to do a Man-Away style steampunk airship adventure where it's just you get an airship and travel around to different locations also. So
can I tell you something? So this is all of us have like the stories that we want to have in our mind. Like if somebody sat down and said, okay, Ron, let's say you could develop I'm asking myself a question now, I guess, in the interview. If you could concept and develop your own adventure path without any other stakeholders, just do it, go nuts, what would it be? My current thinking would be one where the players early on get a hold of one of the shory flying cities and they sail around in the flying cities because other people have awakened the shory cities, and you have big space battles between air battles between your flying cities. Let's throw in some city building mechanics, right? So you're bringing people on to your floating city that you're going to war with other floating cities that are full of bad guys. Anyway, that's the story that I think would be awesome. So when you say, your Mana Waste steamship fighting, I'm like, oh man, I'm with you there. Let's do it.
Oh yeah. All right. Well, if we can find some way to combine all of these ideas together into to one giant, I'd just be happy as long as the flying city has like a big prow on the front of it, so it can ram other flying cities.
Oh, that'd be awesome. Well set.
Yeah.
Of course. Boarding action. That's how boarding action.
Yeah. There you go.
Oh my goodness. That would be amazing because you would get to bring back all of the ship-to-ship combat that's in Skull and Shackle. You get to bring all of that into second edition. That'd be really rad. I'd buy it.
Yeah, maybe.
I'd buy it.
Maybe get some those little like hover pads from what was that? Was that Flash Gordon? I think they had the hover pads in that they rode around like little chariots.
Oh, yeah, it's just like a single person thing to go from one to the other, right? We're gonna do this is the sneaky part of the adventure where you got to sneak onto the city in your little hover chariot, sneak into the enemy city, and then fight them and find out stuff, and then make a grand escape, and there's explosions and.
I am down for this adventure path, so let me know when this happens.
Alrighty.
So I think we're through our questions, and we've reached the hour that you were so gracious to provide us the time for. So thank you for joining us, Ron. And as mentioned earlier, your newest adventure, Assault on Hunting Lodge 7, amazing name, by the way, for the Agents of Edgewatch Adventure Path comes out later, or this next month, since it is still technically September. Is there anything else that you'd like our listeners to know about?
Oh, yes. I have I am eager and enthusiastic about sharing or writing tips for role-playing game writers, primarily in Pathfinder and Starfinder, but also 5th edition. I do so on my blog, www.runamokgames.com/blog, and you'll find, just tons of stuff there, from everything from how to make a compelling villain to how you draw an angled hallway. So I get into all sorts of things on that. So please do check that out, and I'm excited to be able to have what tidbits I have help other people become better writers.
Yeah, and if you're watching this after the fact on YouTube or listening to this on our Ventures podcast feed, then we'll include a link in the description below so that you guys can find that more easily.
Perfect. Thank you.
So I guess with that, so thank you to all the Pathfolk who've hopefully enjoyed this and also joined us this evening. And yeah, until next time, good luck, Pathfinders.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.